StoryCon presents Backstory, a podcast featuring writers, readers, and their stories, hosted by best-selling author Jennifer A. Nielsen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Backstory podcast, sponsored by Operation Literacy. We are so thrilled to have you here, and I am introducing a guest that I literally cannot believe that we get to have this guest on the show with us. This is like the biggest deal ever. And those of you in the book world, you know, this is like the level of Elvis, right? To get Elvis on the show. That's what we have. This is Neal Shusterman. As a brief introduction, Neal Shusterman is the New York Times best-selling author of more than 50 award-winning books for children, teens, and adults, including Challenger Deep, which won the National Book Award, Courage to Dream, a Sidney Taylor Honor Book, Scythe, a Michael L. Prince Honor Book, The Unwind Dystology, which won more than 30 domestic and international awards, and the highly acclaimed novels Dry and Roxy, which he co-wrote with his son Jared. For his body of work, Neal won the 2024 Margaret A. Edwards Award and the Allen Lifetime Achievement Award. His novel, Unwind, has become part of literary canon in many school districts across the country. He has won more than 30 domestic and international awards. Many of his novels are in development as TV series and movies. Shusterman has also received awards from organizations such as the International Reading Association, the American Library Association. He has garnered a myriad of state and local awards across the country. With degrees in both psychology and drama, he has a unique approach to writing, and his novels always deal with topics that appeal to adults as well as teens, weaving true-to-life characters into sensitive and riveting issues, and binding it all together with a unique and entertaining sense of humor. Neal lives in Jacksonville, Florida, but spends much of his time traveling the world speaking, exploring, and signing books for readers. Neal Shusterman, welcome to Backstory.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
I really think it's possible that there are no awards left for you to win. Like, they're going to have to start making up brand new awards for this next stage of your career because you've pretty much gathered in everything else.
It does. Sometimes it feels like an embarrassment of riches, but it's wonderful to know that fans are enjoying the books and that they're being well received.
Well, and I think there's something to that, and that humility really comes through, that embarrassment of riches. You've earned it. And I have so much respect for that list because that is not easily gained. So it's a well-earned embarrassment of riches. But I want to go all the way back. What were you like as a kid?
I was always creative, and I was also ADHD. They didn't call it that back then, though. I was just hyper. Oh, he's a hyper kid. And my teachers, they would pull their hair out because I was always bouncing around the room, shouting out answers. I could never sit still. My third grade teacher just couldn't stand to have me in the classroom. So basically, she would, most of the time, when I got out of hand, she would send me out and send me to the library. That was my punishment, was going to the library. And I was not a reader. I really was way behind grade level. I didn't have the patience to sit and read. But when I get sent to the library, I had nothing else to do but sit in the library and read, and I kind of became the librarian's pet. So the librarian would always have a book for me, and by the end of third grade, I became a much better reader. I ended up being the best reader in my class. When I graduated from elementary school, I got the award for the reading award for the school, and this from a kid who was a total non-reader. So I really have to hand it to my elementary school librarian, who really helped make a reader out of me.
Does she know that? Did she ever know that that's what she did for you?
I have tried to find her, and I haven't been able to. Her name was Judith Shapiro, and I remember the last thing that she said to me when I graduated from elementary school. She came up to me and my parents with this big smile on her face, and she said, "I've named all my gray hairs Neal Shusterman."
Which is a compliment, but also a mark for it. You said that as a child, you've written about and spoken about having a lot of career dreams. and then a teacher who proved rather discouraging to those dreams. Can you talk about that?
She was my high school art teacher, and
Oh.
she was one of my favorite teachers. And I would tell her, I want to be an artist, and I want to be a writer, and I want to be a musician, and I want to be an actor. And she said, Neal, you can't be all those things. You can't be a jack of all trades and master of none. So I thought of that, and I said, okay, I'll pick three. I'll do all of these different things. I'll be a jack of 7 trades, but a master of 3. That was my response to her, and she laughed. She thought that was funny. But she was one of my favorite teachers, actually, and she wasn't discouraging. She was she sort of put me on the right path, because
A little reality check,
a
maybe?
little reality check. And she said, pick the things that you love the most, because you can't do everything. And I actually have reconnected with her in recent years, and she actually came to one of my book signings. She lives in Miami now, and she came to one of my book signings last year, and it was wonderful to get a chance to talk with her again.
I feel like there's some people in the world, and this is probably where the teacher was at. I think there's some people in the world who have more talent than time. That there's a dozen things they could do, and that they'd be brilliant at it. But at some point, we have to leave something behind because there's something we value more, even though we know we'd have been great at it.
It all comes back to that whole ADHD thing, just so distracted by so many different things that I want to do, that one of the coping mechanisms is hyperfocus. So I was always able to sort of hyperfocus. This is why I do things like go on cruise ships to write. Everything's going on around me, and the more white noise is around me, the more I'm able to sort of zoom in and sort of be in my own universe. And so that sort of comes from being a coping mechanism to dealing with ADHD.
Well, that's fascinating that's the way you adjusted. It's like almost a brilliant sort of overcorrection that serves you very well.
Well, you take the various things that life gives you, and you figure out how to use them as tools.
Yeah. No, and so for you, ADHD and using that as a tool, do you feel like that contributed to your natural creativity?
I think so. I mean, I always loved doing creative things, and it was really in high school that writing emerged as a thing that I was most passionate about.
How did that come about?
It really happened in 9th grade. I had my 9th grade English teacher challenged me to write a story a month for extra credit, and I needed extra credit in English because I was kind of what you would call a self-sabotaging overachiever. I would always do more work than was necessary. I would always go over the top, but I would always get everything in late. And so I was failing English because all of my projects were coming in late and I was getting half credit. So my English teacher made a deal with me. She knew that I loved writing, and she said, Neal, if you write a story a month and get it in on the first Monday of the month, I'll give you back all of your lost points for things that you've turned in late. But if you miss that date, you don't get anything. So she used what I loved, which was writing, to sort of teach me about deadlines and budgeting my time and getting things in on time. And by the end of 9th grade, I felt like a writer, and I haven't stopped writing ever since.
Wow. What then have you not done that you sometimes think about and wonder, what if I had taken that path, something that you loved in your past?
I had dreamed of being an architect. I wanted to design things. I wanted to design physical structures. But writing is very much like imaginary architecture, and you're building worlds in a very similar way. So they're very, very much related. I don't regret any of it, but if I was told that I could go back and do something else, that I had to do something else, that might be the choice.
All right, interesting. You wrote that when you were 16, your family moved from Brooklyn to Mexico City.
Yes.
And then you spent the last 2 years of your high school life there. How did that impact who you are?
Life-changing. Having an international experience is a life-changing experience. When I was growing up, I grew up in Brooklyn, and I always wanted to leave. Everybody always wants to leave where they are. They always think where they are is not good enough. So my dream is I wanted to move to California. That was always my dream when I was a kid. I watched the Brady Bunch and all these shows that took place in California, and that was the life that I wanted. And then my dad came home one day during the summer between 10th and 11th grade, and he said, my company has transferred me. And I said, where are we going? And I figured, California. Yes, make it California. And he says, we're going to Mexico. Mexico City. I didn't speak a word of Spanish. I took 4 years of French in middle school and in my first 2 years of high school. So got there, had severe culture shock, couldn't communicate. First couple of months were difficult, but once I acclimated, it's like the world opened up. And by the time I graduated, I felt like a citizen of the world. I felt like I could go anywhere and do anything. It really opened up that sense that the world is a place that is not frightening. It's a place that you can explore. I was put out of my comfort zone, and then I found that my comfort zone was being out of my comfort zone. And that is a changing thing to realize.
That's the coolest thing ever. Just to recognize that. Do you find that your comfort zone, being out of your comfort zone, it's not just where you stand, right? It's not your zip code. That's your life.
Yeah, it's, every time something happens that throws a curveball, I get excited, because there's always something, when there's something new happening, when there's something that changes things up, it's a very exciting thing. That whole idea of being out of your comfort zone, of when I travel, I explore. I like to go out exploring. When the first time I went to Tokyo, I just started going on the subways and didn't understand anything. I had to figure it all out. It was like playing a video game, trying to decipher everything. And it was so much fun. And I told a friend this, and they said, oh, I would be terrified. No, to me, that wasn't fear. That was excitement. That was fun. So that's kind of the way I tend to approach things.
Are you a risk taker by nature then?
No.
No.
Well, I guess there's it's a little bit of there's some risks I won't take, but it depends on what kind of risk. I'm not really a risk taker, but when it comes to things that I feel comfortable doing, that aren't, going on the subway in Tokyo is not a dangerous thing.
No.
And it might make me feel uncomfortable. I think there's a difference between things that make you feel uncomfortable and things that make you afraid. I enjoy putting myself in situations where I might feel uncomfortable and have to grapple with things and figure things out. But that's different from bungee jumping. No, I'm not going to do any bungee jumping.
That is good. I will not join you because I will not be there either. Are you, as a writer, though, are you willing to start a story that you don't know if it will work? Will you take that risk?
Yes. I often start stories I don't know where it's going. Before I really commit to it, though, I will know where it's going to end, or at least where I think it's going to end. Usually what I do is I'll come up with an idea. I'll start exploring the idea. For instance, Scythe is a good example of this. The whole idea of a world where we get to live forever, where instead of a dystopian story, it's a story about the opposite. It's a story about what happens when we achieve what we want to achieve. Rather than the things we fear, we get the things we want. What would that world look like? And how do we deal with death in a world where death is no longer natural? And I started with it without coming up with a story. I just started building the world, and I started by writing these journal entries written by these characters whose job it was to thin out the population. What do they think about the job that they have? Are they monsters? Are they good people? Are they like Jedi who are doing things because it is the honorable thing to do? And what's their philosophy? What are their feelings about it? And it all started with those journal entries. I didn't have a story. I just talked about the philosophy. And eventually the story grew from that.
Dang. I have met so many young people who have got that book with them. I have literally never spoken to a single reader who has not loved Scythe.
That's good.
It's never happened. So, yeah. All right, let's go back a little bit. In the first backstory, when we introduced you, we spoke about this discovery about your adoption and that your background, it was very different from the one you had believed. How do you see your identity now? How do you define Neal Shusterman?
Well, first of all, this is a case in point of being thrown out of your comfort zone and enjoying it. I have since spoken to people who've had similar situations, And sometimes people are okay with it. Other times they're devastated. They can't get past it, which was kind of the opposite for me. It was, wow, this is like I've lived in this house all of my life, and there is a secret room that I never knew about that is filled with all of this magical stuff. And that's what it felt like. You remember the movie The Truman Show?
I loved Truman Show.
One of my favorite movies. I was The Truman Show. I felt like I had just stepped out of The Truman Show. Everybody in my life knew this secret about me that I didn't know. And it was very heady. It was exciting. It was not frightening, but it was eye-opening. And to find out that there is all of this stuff about yourself that you didn't know, that you were raised an only child and you have 6 half siblings and you might actually get to meet them. It was really fascinating. This past year has been an amazing year of discovery. Now, to the question about identity, that's a complicated question because the more I thought about it, that's where I really started to think about the whole idea of identity being fiction. Mm-hmm. I mean, we take the various different things that make us who we are, and we assign importance to these things. We're the ones who do that. The color of our skin, our shared background, our sexuality, all of these things are important parts of who we are, but we choose the things that define us. And we put it all together into this thing that we call an identity. And yes, it's real, but at the same time, it's a narrative that we've created for ourselves. It's fiction. And I find that amazing because the world is defined by these fictions. We are defined by the fictions we create for ourselves, which means fiction is one of the most important things in our lives. And I never want to take that for granted.
I heard a quote once. It was an Aristotle quote. And he was asked, what is more important to study? Fiction, which means the stories that we create, or history, meaning nonfiction. All right, which of the two is most important to study? And he said fiction. Because he said with history, it will tell you what has happened. But fiction teaches you that anything can happen. And I have always loved that idea that for you live in this world where you create, fiction where anything can happen for your readers, and then to connect it with our everyday lives.
And that's really the fun part, is not just creating the fiction, but connecting it. What excites me about a story is that it does connect with our world, with our lives, that we can relate to the characters and what they're going through. And even if they're going through things that are futuristic or fantastical, at its core, they're all going through something that is very real. And I think that's why readers relate to the characters. And those are the stories that I like telling, stories of human truth that are wrapped in fiction.
I love it. Now in college, you loved writing, but it wasn't your major. What did you study? What was your major in college?
I started as bio-sci, pre-med, because my parents told me I was good in math and science, and my parents told me, you're going to be a doctor. And I said, okay, that was from the time I was a kid. You're going to be a doctor. So I started down that path. And by the time I got to my sophomore year and took organic chemistry, I realized, no, I'm not cut out for this. This is not where my passion is. My passion was in writing. My passion was in theater. And I was fascinated by the human mind. So I thought that I would change my major to English. But the thing about majoring in English is that there's all of these analytical essays that you have to write. And I did not want to write analytical essays. And also, everybody that I knew who wanted to be a writer was an English major. And I didn't just want to be part of the pack. And so I thought, well, psychology is the science of the mind and behavior, which I found fascinating. And theater is the art of the mind and behavior. And I thought they went together really well. I enjoyed them both. And so I double majored in theater and psychology.
How is the psychology background? How does that impact your writing?
I think everything that you've studied goes into who you are as a writer. My stories are all very psychological. I mean, there's a strong psychological aspect to all of them. And I think that comes from my fascination with psychology and what I learned as a student. And it continues on in everything that I write.
Do you think the theater background makes you a better writer?
Oh, I think so.
In what way?
The, I mean, the ability to tell stories. I mean, I did a lot of playwriting when I was in college. The ability to tell dramatic stories, surreal stories. I remember seeing shows by Beckett and Edward Albee and so many different types of experimental theater that it really set me up to write something like Full Tilt or Challenger Deep, where it's dealing with a lot of surrealism. So I think there is a very theatrical aspect to the things that I write.
I would completely agree. They're very visual stories. So your debut novel, can you tell us about that? And that was Shadow Club, right?
Yes.
And how did you get that contract? What was that debut experience or getting to the debut experience like for you?
Well, it wasn't the first book that I wrote. First book that I wrote was a very, very bad fantasy. And it started, I mean, all these stories started when I was a counselor working at a summer camp in upstate New York. During college, during the summer, I would go work at this camp where I was a camper. Now I was a counselor. And I got to be known as the camp storyteller. But I had to come up with stories. And so I would make up stories, and some stories became the kids' favorite, so I would tell them again and again. And they would always say, why don't you write that into a book? I'd read it. And so when I went back to college, I spent free time during that year writing one of them into a book, and I brought that book back with me. I made copies. I even drew my own cover and gave out copies to all the kids. And then I tried to sell it, and nobody wanted it. And a year later, I did the same thing with another book, couldn't sell it. The third one, The Shadow Club, was the one that sold, and it was based on one of the stories that I told at camp. And that one, by that point, I had an agent. And prior to that, I was sending all the other books out to every publisher. I would just find the addresses of publishers and send them out. And they would respond, with form letters that say, things like, "Dear author, thank you for your submission. However, it does not meet our needs." Now I was going through the agent. The first publisher that saw it was Stephanie Laurie, who at the time worked at Little Brown, and she was a junior editor. She loved the sample chapters, and her response was that she loves this book, but she can't buy it unless she sees the whole book. But all I had was 30 pages. But it was the first time anybody ever said the word buy in the same sentence as my book, so that really motivated me to finish the book. And so I got the Shadow Club done, and they bought it. All my friends would say, "Neal, you're an overnight success. Your book sold to the first publisher that saw it." Well, yeah, they didn't see the hundreds of rejections I had leading up to that.
Did you, if you talk about hundreds of rejections, what kept you going?
Stubbornness and the support of the people who liked it. I mean, there were always people in my life who were excited about the stories. I mean, those kids at camp who would always want to find out what story was coming next and which one I was going to write into a book. I am still in touch with several of them. I mean, they're in their 40s and 50s now, and I'm still in touch with them. And one of them just sent me, he found in his garage a copy of that first book and sent me a picture of him holding it.
No way.
He still had it after all these years.
Backstory is brought to you by StoryCon. StoryCon is the evolution of Teen Author Boot Camp, the largest combined writing camp and fan expo in the Intermountain West. Join us on February 21st and 22nd, 2025 at the Salt Palace Convention Center in Salt Lake City, Utah. The event will feature keynote speeches and masterclasses from internationally best-selling authors like Jeff Kinney, Neal Shusterman, Shannon Hale, Marissa Meyer, and many more. Other activities include an exhibitor hall that's free to the public, writing contests, and the Operation Literacy Awards Gala. Visit storycon.org today to register. That's STORYCON.org. Hurry, masterclasses have a limited space.
Is there somebody who stands out that was a cheerleader for you early on?
It had to be my teachers all along. It was from the art teacher that I told you about to my 9th grade English teacher to a professor in college who was the one who told me to stop writing science fiction. And it was the best advice I ever got. Because I guess I was writing all short stories. It was a short story class and all science fiction, Twilight Zone kinds of short stories. And I was working on a novel. And he asked me, "Do you want to be a professional writer or are you doing this just for fun?" And I said, "No, this is what I want to do." And he said, "Then you need to stop writing science fiction." And they asked him why. And he said, because you can already do that. What you need to do is you need to go outside of that. You need to try different things. Learn about telling stories about people rather than stuff. And so he assigned me to write in every single genre, except for science fiction. I had to write a romance, a mystery, a historical story, a Western. And at the end of that class, I realized I really enjoyed doing all this other stuff too. And, the Shadow Club wasn't science fiction. My first few novels that were published were not science fiction. It was years later that I came back to science fiction and fantasy. And when I did, my writing was 10 times better because now it was about people in extraordinary circumstances, not just all the bells and whistles. It was at its core about the characters. And that's what I needed to learn. And so that was some of the best advice I ever got.
I think that's incredible advice. I'm going to write it down and just mark it for future. If you could go back to that debut novelist, what would you tell him that you would love for him to know moving forward?
Stop stressing out. Stop being so stressed. Enjoy it. Enjoy it because you're going to look back and remember how stressed you were when you didn't really need to be.
Wow.
And this is what my future self 10 years from now can tell myself now also.
That's what's going to be my next question. Would younger you have listened to you now? And it sounds...
No.
No. All right. But your priorities have probably changed over time. You've proven yourself. You've had this amazing career. For you, what drives you now as a writer?
Wanting to tell stories that mean something. Wanting to tell stories that in some small way make the world better or help people in some way. The most amazing moments that I've experienced have been from individual fans who would come up to me and clutching a copy. And this has happened more than once, where someone will come clutching a copy of Challenger Deep and say to me, like shaking, sometimes in tears, this book saved my life. To think that ideas, that words can have that much of a powerful effect on somebody, it makes me realize why I do what I do. I have on the desktop of my computer a folder of my favorite fan mail that every once in a while, when I start to feel discouraged, I'll go and read those emails. And they just remind me that I'm doing good work out there and it's worthwhile. One of my favorite letters is from a girl who wrote to talk to me about the book Everlost, the whole series, which is about this world in between life and death. The main characters have a car accident on the first page and they find themselves caught in a world between life and death. She said that it was her favorite book that she read with her best friend, and on vacation, her best friend had gotten into an accident and died right in front of her. And she said in the days after that, she reread the Everlost books because that was the bond that she and her friend had. And it brought her comfort because that whole idea that everything that we think we lose is never lost, that maybe the universe has a memory that holds on to everything, was incredibly comforting to her. And she wanted to write to me to thank me for giving her that in dealing with the death of her friend. You never know, writing, you're throwing a stone into a pond and you never see where those ripples go. But every once in a while, one of those ripples comes back to you and you see what you've done. And it's a powerful thing.
Yeah. Wow. I don't know. I've got to take a breath for just a moment. Neal, you write for many different ages and in different genres. That's pretty rare for an author. Why do you think that works so well for you? Is it that college professor who encouraged you to try different things, or is it you
Yes,
taking yourself out of your comfort zone?
it's that and the ADHD, I think. I get bored very easily. I don't want to write the same thing over and over again. Every time I approach a book, what excites me is that it's something that I've never done before. And I also get excited when it's something that frightens me. So I guess I'm a little bit of a literary masochist because the harder I think it is and the more difficult I think it is going to be, the more interested I am in approaching it.
Mm.
And there is always that time when I'm working on it, when I say to myself, this was too much. I've bitten off more than I can chew. This is the one that will kill me. So far, none of them have. But there are always those moments where I look at it and I say, why? Why did I decide to do this? a graphic novel of fantasy stories that take place during the Holocaust. How am I going to do that? How am I going to make it work? How am I going to make it meaningful and resonant and respectful? And it was a challenge, but I'm pretty pleased with the result. That was, of course, Courage to Dream.
Courage to Dream was pretty important to me. I write a lot of historicals. I've written about the Holocaust, and so I appreciate hearing some of that background because I know what it meant for me as a reader, your approach of it and your treatment of things that are very difficult and very complicated. Thank you for the work you put into that one.
You're welcome. That was a labor of love. That one took 13 years from beginning to end to complete.
Really? So then what do you see where you do write all of these things? What is the thread that ties all of your books together? How do we know it's a Neal Shusterman book?
Stories that make you think, that make me think, that keep me awake at night because I can't stop thinking about them. Perspective. It seems that all of my stories are about trying to gain perspective on situations, trying to look at things from as many different angles as possible. The way I see it, when we look at things from one point of view, we're very limited. I mean, we get a very one-dimensional perspective on things. But if we can look at things from every angle, then we can judge our own lives. My stories are always trying to look at perspectives like that and never take a side, but look at the overall issue itself.
Well, and isn't that the very point of your whole backstory is perspective of hey, we construct identities, we construct ideas, and what you are doing as a writer then is trying to get people to say, let me ask you to think about something in a new way within this fictional construct.
And without making judgment, without telling you this is what you must think, but just saying, here's some things you might want to think about.
Yeah, because you trust your readers to, they'll come up with the answers that they need.
Mm-hmm.
You're building their world for them. Oh, I love that. Neal, how many projects do you work on at this time? Are you a one project at a time or are you multiples?
Think of it as whack-a-mole. Project pops up. I work on it. But then another one pops up. I'd work on it. Then an editor calls and says, where's this manuscript? I need this manuscript now. Okay, I switch gears and I go to this next one. So I'm always jumping back and forth. I've never done anything that's beginning to end because I tend to burn out. I might work 100 pages on a project and then get to that point where I just am burned out on it.
All right. And you also do screenwriting?
I do. Less now than I used to because the books are doing so well and I have so many that I have to get done that I'm not doing as much screenwriting as I used to. But I love doing that. The problem with screenwriting and television writing is that a script or a teleplay is just a blueprint for a movie or TV show that might never get made, that probably will never get made. Because the average is, for film, it's like 1 in 30 projects that the studios develop will get made. Television, it's about 1 in 10. I don't even know if those numbers are correct anymore. It might even be worse. But, you can have a career writing scripts and very rarely get things made. And so that can be very depressing. I tend to put my heart and my soul more into the books because I know that those are going to get published and they're going to reach an audience.
What do you draw in from the world that influences you as a writer? Is it your environment? Is it news? Is it media? What do you pull in that becomes your well that you draw from?
I never know what it's going to be. It's just something that's happening in the world, something that I see, something that I read, and it just starts something going. And it can be in the most unexpected place, and it just pops up. And I just had one of these the other day when I was actually in the movies. I was going to see Wicked, and they had, even before the coming attractions, they have those really stupid commercials. And there was nothing in the commercial that inspired the idea that I came up with. Nothing. I couldn't figure out where it came from, but I came up with this idea and it started building. And by the time I went home that night, I wrote it down, and it might be a whole new book series that has nothing to do with anything that was actually happening. It just happened to pop into my head at that time. It's like it was like radio waves, just pumped it into my brain. I never know where these things come from.
All right, this book right here, All
Yes,
Better Now. We can get
I
the
have it too.
There we go. Whoa, matching sets.
Yes.
Oh, I loved this. Can you
Thank you.
tell our listeners about this book, All Better Now?
This was inspired. And this is again where ideas come from. I was speaking at a bookstore, and someone had commented that unwind was kind of prophetic. And then someone said, well, dry is prophetic. And then someone in the audience said, why don't you just predict something nice? And so I said, okay, I'll take you up on that challenge. And so I thought, well, what about a story about a pandemic of happiness? What if there's this new virus and it seems like it's going to be like another coronavirus, it's going to be like COVID, but people start realizing when you recover from it, whatever was wrong with your life is better. You know, all of that anxiety that you had is gone. Suddenly you're content. This virus brings absolute contentment for the rest of your life. Who wouldn't want to catch that? And who would want to create a vaccine against it? And that became All Better.
All right, this is out February 4th. Absolutely get this on your pre-order list. And then the instant it comes in, put it on the very top of your reading stack. I don't care what else is on your reading stack. If my books are on your reading stack, put this on top of them and make sure it's so great.
Is there a few minutes where I can do a reading from it?
I would be completely honored if we could close with that, please.
Now I just have to find the spot that I wanted to read.
I'm kind of eager to see what you're going to pull. I have my favorite sections, but...
There it is.
Perfect. Please.
Now, it is all out of context, so you'll have to sort of just figure it out. Chicago. So many lives, so many vectors, so many souls swarming, each thinking their particular concern is the only thing that matters. Thinking themselves connected to their lives, to their families, to their world, but only because they haven't experienced true connection, such as the joy of looking in a stranger's eyes and knowing that they love you like the closest of siblings, like a mother, like a father, like a daughter, like a son, and knowing that they always will, even if a single passing glance is all you'll ever share. This is what the human race could be, is meant to be, and yet it resists. How strange that what people most fear is the conquest of fear, as if terror were a living, breathing thing, a deformed beast wallowing in fetid darkness determined to protect its own existence. This is the crux of the war, that beast and the light that aims to doom it. Even now, in every corner of the world, viral light is penetrating the dark places. There is nowhere for fear and anger and hatred to hide, but they will not go easy into the night. They will fight, digging deep into the core of people's loneliness, telling them that they must remain distrustful, solitary, convincing them that they must remain as they are, unembraced and fearing to be held. As if being lifted above all they ever knew would leave them at gravity's mercy. But in this war, as in every war, there will come a singular moment where one adversary seals the fate of the other.
And that, my friends, is why it is the greatest privilege to interview Neal Shusterman, to hear those words in his own voice. Thank you so very much.
You're very welcome. It has been a pleasure.
I appreciate it. So the Backstory podcast, it is sponsored by Operation Literacy. On February 21st and 22nd of 2025, they are hosting the StoryCon in Salt Lake City. Neal Shusterman will be one of the keynote speakers, so please make sure you are there to hear him live. This event will sell out. Get your tickets now. Every one of us has a backstory. It is the life that happened to us before we begin happening to life. It will mold you. It will form you into the most amazing person that you can ever be, which means your story, fiction or not, will always be important.
Thank you for listening to Backstory. If you'd like to enjoy more episodes, visit us at storycon.org/backstory. That's StoryCon.org/backstory.